Within the system, we have two forms of or methods to identify strength in a market movement. People think of strength in a cycle change when they think of a gap up or a gap down. And that's immediate on that day. And people don't realize that that the strength identification is often in multiple days. A BOC higher pattern, for example, obviously identifies the strength on that particular day. It's the first day of a turnaround, and that strength that we see can be carried through into multiple days. BOC higher patterns can be line lengths, a line length indicator sign for several days of an uptrend. The two types of strength are line length indicators and divergence. And so divergence as well it comes in just dozens and dozens and dozens of formats or conditions, and is a identification of opposites pushing in the on the value of the stock at the same time. Now that opposite push causes a reaction, and the greater the opposition, the greater the reaction. And so divergence is a powerful method for identification of strength within the marketplace. We're obviously identifying opposing strength, but that's the power of it. And as a result of that, we often see significant movements in the price. In this example here, I have my favorite two divergent indicators, trend red and down here PowRed. And trend red is in a bottlenose down pattern, and PowRed is in a right leg W lower pattern. Or when I'm comparing a bottlenose, I'll often think of the idea that it's a notch down pattern, whereas in that the middle line of the power chart went up instead of going down like in a bottlenose pattern. So you might think of this as a BOC lower pattern, which is again the start of a downtrend, but the power of the system is in the sensitive indicators. Because the 22 market force recognition indicators are very sensitive, they create a higher level of divergent observations. And so we have many conditions that would not appear divergent on other systems that are divergent at DTVB. And that's one of the powers that we see because of the indicators being the heart of the system. So in this example here on the vertical green line, we have, as I mentioned, some of the key things that we have is that trend red is lowest, PowRed is lowest. It's very beneficial when those two are lowest. We also have power yellow lowest if I move this up. And then over on the zip chart we have zip red is at 8, I believe, and prior to that day, zip red was at 81. So you can see that zip red went down over 70 points. And that in itself is a strong indication of something happening the next day. It doesn't, going down 70 points doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go up 70 points. For example, you can get zip red that goes from 4 to 94, and the zip red will go down typically the next day, but the price will go up simply because zip red moved in such a huge distance and ended up over 90. So they can move, it can move huge distances and then end up in the low 80s, and that's not the same move as zip red going from under 5 to over 90. And so you get a strong movement up like that. But in any case, we also have a number of TOC lower patterns, which you may have noticed in this, and which constitutes when you have a TOC pattern at the bottom of a cycle, it's obviously a divergent condition in itself as well. So, and then the last one I'll point out on the vertical green line in the zip chart is that zip Zion is highest. And if you've studied gaps at all, you realize that many times gaps occur when zip Zion is highest. It can be going up or going down, but the fact that it's the highest indicator in the zip chart is the key. And so we obviously, excuse me, we obviously did not have a gap, but one of those conditions that forms a gap also forms, in this case here, 4 green candles the day after this vertical green line. And so I'm identifying this obviously as a pattern that you can recognize as an upturn condition. Zip Zion is a piece of supporting evidence that tells us about what's going to happen in the next few days. The TOC lower patterns at the bottom are also a indication of the same thing. It's just more supporting evidence. Red going down 70 plus points and ending up, it's like it sticks its nose out under that. You've heard me comment about that in nose out patterns before. So again, trend red and power red are in divergence, and that's one of the things that I often look for. Those two are my favorite two to be in divergence. They can obviously be in a line pattern, or a line, one up, one down, like in the big three when trend red is down and power red is up. That's the next day. You may have a red candle on that day, but next day you're going to start an uptrend, or at least you're going to have one day up. And likewise, you can have trend red and power red BOC patterns that are different, or right leg W patterns, or high M patterns. There's just a lot of them. Those two, when they are opposed to each other, there usually something significant happens. So that's the power of divergence. It's the identification of those opposing forces, and obviously we see that because of the 22 MFR.